The honor guard lifted their rifles in perfect synchronization, and the first volley echoed across Arlington National Cemetery like thunder rolling through marble halls. I watched from somewhere beyond the veil as 500 soldiers in dress blues stood at attention, their faces carved from stone, their ribbons telling stories of wars I had fought beside them. My mother-in-law sat in the front row, her face pale as winter frost, staring at the sea of military precision that surrounded my flag-draped coffin. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. She had called me weak just 3 months ago. "Delicate little thing," she'd whispered to her bridge club friends when she thought I couldn't hear. I don't know what my son sees in her. She wouldn't last 5 minutes in the real world. Now, the real world was here, in formation, saluting the woman she never bothered to know. The second volley fired, and I remembered the day it all began. Not the day I died, but the day I decided to live on my own terms. I was 22, fresh out of college with a degree in international relations that my future in-laws dismissed as playing pretend diplomat. David and I had been dating for 2 years, and I loved him with the fierce certainty of youth, but his family treated me like an unwelcome guest at their own table. It was Thanksgiving dinner when his mother, Patricia, set down her wine glass and looked at me with those cold blue eyes that seemed to measure everything and find it wanting. "So, Celeste," she said, my name sounding foreign in her mouth, "what exactly are your plans? David's going to take over the firm eventually. He'll need someone who understands the social expectations." The firm. Always the firm. David's father ran a prestigious law practice in downtown Richmond, the kind with leather-bound books and oil paintings of dead judges. Old Virginia money, wrapped in tradition and tied with ribbons of expectation. I was supposed to fit into that world like a puzzle piece cut from someone else's picture. "I'm actually considering the military," I said, the words tumbling out before I could stop them. The silence that followed was so complete, I could hear the grandfather clock ticking in the hallway. David's fork clattered against his plate. His father, Robert, adjusted his glasses and cleared his throat like he was about to deliver a closing argument. But it was Patricia who spoke first, her laugh sharp as crystal breaking. "The military?" She said it like I'd announced my intention to join the circus. "Darling, you're barely 5'4" and you cry during commercials. What could you possibly contribute to our nation's defense?" The condescension in her voice hit me like a slap, but it was the look in David's eyes that cut deeper. Not support, not curiosity, just embarrassment. He was embarrassed by me, by my dreams, by the audacity of thinking I could be something more than his decorative wife. That night, lying in the guest bedroom with its rose-colored wallpaper and judgmental family portraits, I made a decision that would reshape everything. I wasn't going to shrink myself to fit their expectations. I was going to grow beyond them entirely. The recruitment office in Richmond was tucked between a dry cleaner and a tax preparation service. Hardly the glamorous beginning to a military career. Staff Sergeant Maria Rodriguez looked up from her paperwork when I walked in, taking in my carefully pressed slacks and the nervous energy that followed me like a shadow. "Can I help you?" she asked, and I noticed the bronze star ribbon on her uniform, the combat action badge that spoke of battles fought and won. "I want to serve," I said, and the simplicity of those words felt like stepping off a cliff into clean air. She studied me for a long moment, and I wondered if she saw what Patricia saw, a soft girl from a comfortable world who had never faced real hardship. But when she spoke, her voice was kind but firm. "What branch were you thinking?" "Army," I said without hesitation. "I want to be where the real work happens." She smiled then, the first genuine smile I'd received from anyone in weeks. "Let's talk about your options." 2 hours later, I walked out with papers for officer candidate school and a future I hadn't known I wanted until that moment. My phone buzzed as I reached my car. "David, Mom told me you went to see a recruiter today. Please tell me this is some kind of joke." I looked at the papers in my hand, at the commitment I was about to make. "It's not a joke, David. This is what I want to do." You want to throw away everything we've planned? Everything we've built together? We haven't built anything, I said, surprised by the clarity in my voice. Your family has built something, and they expect me to fit into it. But that's not who I am. The silence stretched between us like a chasm opening in real time. When he finally spoke, his voice was cold, distant, already grieving something he thought we'd lost. If you do this, we're done, Celeste. I can't be with someone who chooses this over us. I looked at the recruitment papers again, at the promise of becoming someone I could respect. Then, I guess we're done. The call ended with the soft click of a closing door, and I sat in that parking lot crying tears that felt like rain after a long drought. Not tears of grief, but tears of relief. I had finally chosen myself. Officer Candidate School at Fort Benning was a baptism by fire that burned away everything I thought I knew about my own limitations. The woman who had cried during commercials learned to function on 3 hours of sleep while memorizing military law. The girl who had been too delicate for Patricia's approval learned to low-crawl through Georgia mud while carrying a 40-pound rucksack. My platoon sergeant was a woman named First Sergeant Williams, a 20-year veteran who looked at each of us like she was deciding whether we were worth the investment of her time. She was tall and lean, with scars on her hands and a silver star ribbon that commanded instant respect from everyone who knew what it meant. "You think you're tough?" she asked during our first week, her voice carrying across the training bay like a challenge thrown down. Tough isn't about muscles or attitude. Tough is about finishing what you start when everything in your body is telling you to quit. Tough is about making the hard choice when the easy one is right there waiting for you. I thought about those words during the long nights when my body screamed for rest and my mind whispered Patricia's predictions. "You're too weak for this. You'll never make it."
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story.
They were right about you. But every morning I got up anyway. Every day I chose to stay, to push forward, to become someone worthy of the uniform I wanted to wear. The physical challenges were brutal, but they were nothing compared to the mental warfare of believing I deserved to be there. During the 9th week, we had our field training exercise, a 3-day test in the woods where everything we'd learned would be put to the test under stress and sleep deprivation. I was assigned as the platoon leader for the final day, responsible for getting 30 candidates through a series of obstacles while being evaluated by instructors who seemed to exist solely to find our breaking points. The night before, I called my parents from the payphone outside the barracks. They had been supportive of my decision, in their quiet way, understanding that this was something I needed to do even if they couldn't quite grasp why. "How are you holding up, sweetheart?" my mother asked, and I could hear the worry in her voice despite her efforts to sound encouraging. "I'm good, Mom. Really good. Different, but good." "Have you heard from David at all?" The question hung in the air like smoke from an extinguished fire. "No, and I don't expect to. This isn't his world." "Maybe when you're done with this phase." "Mom," I interrupted gently, "this isn't a phase. This is who I am now. This is who I was always supposed to be." The next morning, I led my platoon through 12 hours of simulated combat scenarios, land navigation challenges, and leadership problems designed to break down our decision-making under pressure. When candidates started dropping from exhaustion, I carried their gear. When morale plummeted during a particularly brutal river crossing, I reminded them that we were almost home. "Candidate Chen?" First Sergeant Williams called out as we staggered across the finish line at sunset, our uniforms soaked with sweat and river water, our faces streaked with mud and determination. A word. I followed her away from the group, my heart hammering against my ribs. Had I failed? Had I let my people down? "You know what I saw today?" she asked, her voice quiet but carrying the weight of evaluation. "No, First Sergeant." "I saw a leader. Not someone trying to prove she belonged, but someone who knew she belonged and was willing to do the work to stay there." She paused, studying my face in the fading light. "Where did you find that?" I thought about the question, about the long journey from Patricia's dining room to this moment. I stopped asking for permission to be who I am. She nodded slowly. That's the first rule of leadership, Candidate Chen. You can't lead others to a place you haven't been yourself. Graduation from OCS was a ceremony of transformation. I stood in formation wearing the gold bars of a second lieutenant, my parents beaming from the visitor stand. David wasn't there, and neither were his parents, but their absence felt like freedom rather than loss. My first assignment was Fort Campbell, Kentucky, home of the 101st Airborne Division, the Screaming Eagles. I was assigned to the 3rd Brigade Combat Team as a military intelligence officer responsible for analyzing threats and briefing commanders on enemy capabilities. It wasn't the front lines, but it was the nerve center that kept soldiers alive. My battalion commander was Lieutenant Colonel Sarah Martinez, a veteran of 3 deployments who had earned her position through competence and courage. She had a reputation for demanding excellence and accepting no excuses, but also for taking care of her people with fierce loyalty. "Lieutenant Chen," she said during my first meeting in her office, a Spartan space decorated only with unit awards and photos of soldiers she had served with, "I've read your file. Top of your OCS class, high security clearance, degree in international relations. Tell me why you chose military intelligence." "Because information saves lives, ma'am. The better we understand the threat, the better we can protect our people." She smiled, the first crack in her professional demeanor. "Good answer. Now prove it." My first deployment came 8 months later, Afghanistan, 2015. The drawdown was underway, but the mission remained dangerous and complex. Our forward operating base was a collection of concrete barriers and prefabricated buildings in Helmand Province, surrounded by desert that stretched to mountains that looked like broken teeth against the sky. My job was to analyze intelligence reports, identify patterns in enemy activity, and brief the command staff on threats to our operations. It was detailed, meticulous work that required absolute accuracy because mistakes got people killed. The heat was relentless, the isolation complete, and the responsibility crushing. I shared a tiny room with Captain Jessica Park, a logistics officer from Oregon, who had been deployed twice before and served as my guide to the rhythms of combat operations. "First deployment?" she asked, on our second night, as we lay on our narrow cots listening to the generator hum outside our door. "Is that how obvious it is? You're still folding your uniforms like you're going to inspection. Give it 2 weeks and you'll be happy if they're inside out." She was right about the uniforms, but wrong about the standards. I never stopped pressing my clothing, never stopped shining my boots, and never stopped holding myself to the same standards I had learned at Fort Benning. In a place where everything was temporary and makeshift, maintaining those small disciplines felt like holding on to something essential. 3 weeks into the deployment, intelligence indicated a planned attack on a supply convoy traveling the main highway between our base and Kandahar. The information came from multiple sources, but it was fragmentary and contradictory. Some reports suggested an improvised explosive device, others a complex ambush with multiple elements. I spent 18 hours analyzing the intelligence, cross-referencing it with historical attack patterns and terrain analysis. The picture that emerged was troubling. The convoy route passed through a valley where the enemy had conducted similar operations before, but the timing and method suggested something more sophisticated than previous attacks. At the morning briefing, I presented my assessment to the command staff. The room was crowded with officers planning the day's operations, their faces tired but alert in the fluorescent light. "Sir," I began, addressing Colonel James Morrison, the brigade commander who had flown in for the briefing, "I believe the intelligence indicates a complex ambush timed to coincide with the convoy's passage through Grid Square Echo 741.
Historical patterns suggest the enemy will use multiple firing positions along the ridgeline here, with the secondary blocking position at the north end of the valley. I recommend altering the route and increasing security for the convoy." Colonel Morrison studied the map, his fingers drumming against the table in thought. "What's your confidence level in this assessment, Lieutenant?" 75%, sir. The intelligence is good, but not complete. Recommendations? Change the route, sir. Take the longer path through the Eastern Valley. Add air cover and increase the security element. The room was quiet except for the hum of air conditioning fighting the Afghan heat. Other officers looked at their watches, calculating delays and resource allocation. Every change had cascading effects on other operations. Approved, Colonel Morrison said finally. Adjust the route and add the security element. I'd rather be cautious than sorry. The convoy took the alternate route, adding 2 hours to their journey, but arriving safely at their destination. Later that afternoon, a reconnaissance team found evidence of a prepared ambush at exactly the location I had identified. Bomb-making materials, fighting positions, and equipment left behind when the enemy realized their target wasn't coming. Lieutenant Chen, Colonel Morrison, called me over after the evening briefing. Walk with me. We stepped outside into the desert air, cooler now as the sun settled toward the horizon. The base was winding down from another day of operations, soldiers moving with the practiced efficiency of people who had learned to function in an alien environment. Good work today, he said, his voice carrying the weight of command and the relief of soldiers who had come home safely. That was solid analysis under pressure. Thank you, sir. You know what impressed me most? Not that you were right, though that certainly helps. He paused, looking out at the mountains that concealed so much danger. It was that you were willing to make a call with incomplete information. A lot of analysts wait for perfect intelligence that never comes. You made the best assessment you could with what you had and stood behind it. It's what the job requires, sir. No, Lieutenant, it's what leadership requires. Keep that up. I called my parents that night from the morale tent, using the satellite phone that connected our small outpost to the rest of the world. It was morning back in Virginia, and I could hear my mother making breakfast in the background. "How are things there, honey?" she asked, and I could hear the carefully controlled worry in her voice. "Good, Mom. Really good. Challenging, but good. Are you being safe?" I thought about how to answer that. Safe was a relative concept in a place where mortars fell randomly and every patrol outside the wire was a calculated risk. But safe was also about competence, preparation, and the trust of the people you served with. "As safe as I can be while doing the job right," I said finally. "Your father wants to know if you need anything in your next care package. Books, if you can find any good ones, and maybe some of those trail mix bars I like. Consider it done." A pause, and then, "Celeste, we're proud of you. I hope you know that." The words hit me harder than I expected, bringing unexpected tears to my eyes. "I know, Mom. That means everything." After I hung up, I sat in the quiet tent, listening to the distant sounds of the base settling into its nighttime rhythm. Guard towers, generators, and the occasional aircraft overhead. It was a good sound, the sound of people doing their jobs and watching out for each other. My deployment lasted 9 months, and each month brought new challenges and small victories. I briefed generals and colonels on threat assessments that shaped major operations. I identified patterns in enemy behavior that saved American lives. I earned the respect of people who had initially seen me as another inexperienced lieutenant learning the ropes. The Bronze Star came as a surprise. I was sitting in my small office reviewing intelligence reports when First Sergeant Martinez knocked on my doorframe. "Lieutenant, Colonel Morrison wants to see you in his office." I followed her across the base, wondering what I had done wrong or what new crisis required attention. Colonel Morrison's office was crowded with other officers, including Lieutenant Colonel Martinez and the Command Sergeant Major. They were all smiling. "Lieutenant Chen," Colonel Morrison began, holding a small blue box. "It is my honor to present you with the Bronze Star Medal for meritorious service during combat operations in Afghanistan. Your intelligence analysis directly contributed to the successful completion of multiple combat missions and undoubtedly saved American lives." The medal was small and surprisingly heavy, with a bronze star suspended from a ribbon of red, white, and blue. As he pinned it to my uniform, I thought about Patricia's voice echoing across that Thanksgiving dinner table. "You're barely 5'4" and you cry during commercials." I wasn't crying now. I was standing at attention in a combat zone, wearing a medal that recognized my contribution to something larger than myself. I had found my strength not by becoming someone else, but by becoming more fully who I was always meant to be. The ceremony was small and simple, but the handshakes and congratulations from my fellow officers meant more than any grand celebration could have. These people knew what it meant to earn recognition in this place under these circumstances. Their respect was not given lightly. That night, I called David. I'm not sure why. Maybe because achieving something significant made me want to share it with someone who had known me before I became this person. Maybe because I needed to close a chapter that had been left hanging open.
He answered on the third ring, his voice carefully neutral when he heard my name. Celeste, I heard you were deployed. How are you? I'm good, David. Really good. I paused, searching for the right words. I got an award today. The Bronze Star. Silence on the other end of the line, and then, that's really something. Congratulations. Thank you. Another pause. How are things with you, the firm? Good. Busy. I'm making partner next year. That's great. I'm happy for you. Are you? Happy, I mean, with all of this. I looked around the sparse office where I had spent so many hours analyzing intelligence that kept soldiers alive. Through the small window, I could see the mountains that had become as familiar as the view from my childhood bedroom. Yes, I said, and the certainty in my voice surprised even me. I am. I sometimes wonder what would have happened if... David, I interrupted gently. We both made the right choice. You needed someone who could fit into your world, and I needed to find my own. There's no point in wondering about different endings to a story that was never ours to begin with. When I hung up, I felt the last tether to my old life finally snap. Not with bitterness or regret, but with the quiet satisfaction of a puzzle piece finally finding its proper place. My second deployment came 2 years later, this time to Iraq as part of the Advise and Assist mission. I was a captain now, with more responsibility and a team of junior officers to mentor. The war was winding down, but the work remained critical as Iraqi forces took on greater responsibility for their own security. Our base was larger than the Afghan outpost, with better facilities and more resources, but the mission was more complex. Instead of fighting the enemy directly, we were teaching others to fight them. It required patience, cultural sensitivity, and the ability to build trust across language barriers and vastly different military traditions. My counterpart was Colonel Hakim al-Rashid, an Iraqi intelligence officer who had been fighting various wars for most of his adult life. He was skeptical of American advisors in general, and female officers in particular, making our professional relationship a careful dance of mutual respect and stubborn persistence. Our first meeting was in a conference room that felt like a sauna, with broken air conditioning and flies that seemed immune to all attempts at elimination. Colonel al-Rashid sat across from me with his aide, both men studying me with expressions that revealed nothing. "Colonel Chen," he said in accented but excellent English, "I understand you are here to advise us on intelligence operations?" "Yes, sir, to share information and coordinate our efforts against common threats." "And what makes you qualified to advise soldiers who have been fighting in this region since before you were born?" It was a fair question, delivered without hostility, but with the directness of someone who had earned the right to ask it. I could have recited my credentials, my awards, my years of experience. Instead, I chose honesty. "Nothing, sir. I'm not qualified to tell you how to fight in your own country. But I might be able to share different perspectives on how to analyze intelligence, and I'm definitely qualified to help coordinate between our forces when we're working together." He smiled then, the first genuine expression I had seen from him. "Good answer, Captain. Let us see what we can teach each other." Over the following months, Colonel al-Rashid and I developed a working relationship based on mutual respect and shared frustration with bureaucracy on both sides. He taught me about the complexities of Iraqi tribal politics and the historical grievances that shaped current conflicts. I shared analytical techniques and technological capabilities that complemented his deep understanding of the human terrain. Our partnership proved its worth during a crisis involving a kidnapped Iraqi general. The intelligence was fragmentary and time-sensitive, requiring rapid analysis and immediate action. Working together, we were able to identify the location where the general was being held and coordinate a rescue operation that brought him home safely. "Captain," Colonel al-Rashid said after the successful operation, as we shared tea in his office while reviewing the lessons learned, "you fight like a man, but think like a woman." I wasn't sure whether to be offended or complimented until he continued. "Men, we want to solve problems with force, direct action. But you see the connections, the patterns, the things that are not obvious. It is a gift."
Colonel, if I've learned anything working with you, it's that the best solutions usually require both approaches. Yes, he agreed, raising his tea glass in a small toast. To thinking like women and fighting like men. When my deployment ended, Colonel al-Rashid presented me with a small gift, a traditional Iraqi compass with Arabic inscriptions around the rim. So you always know which direction is forward. Back at Fort Campbell, I was promoted to major and assigned as the battalion intelligence officer, responsible for training and operations across multiple companies. It was a position that required balancing administrative duties with operational readiness, mentoring junior officers while staying current on threats and intelligence capabilities. My new battalion commander was Lieutenant Colonel Robert Hayes, a veteran of multiple combat deployments who had the reputation for demanding excellence while taking care of his soldiers. During my first week, he called me into his office for what I assumed would be a routine introduction. Major Chen, he began, consulting a thick folder that I recognized as my personnel file. Impressive record. 2 combat deployments, Bronze Star, consistently outstanding efficiency reports. Tell me about your goals. Continue serving, sir. Keep learning and growing as an officer. That's what everyone says.
I want to know what you really want. Command? Staff positions? What drives you? I thought about the question, about the journey that had brought me to this moment. I want to be useful, sir. I want to do work that matters and take care of the soldiers under my responsibility. Beyond that, I'm open to whatever the Army needs. He leaned back in his chair, studying me with the calculating look of someone who had learned to read people quickly and accurately. The Army needs leaders, Major. People who can make hard decisions and live with the consequences. People who understand that being an officer is about serving something larger than yourself. Yes, sir. Good, because I'm putting you in charge of our deployment readiness training. 6 months to get this battalion ready for Afghanistan. No pressure. He was joking about the pressure, but the responsibility was real and significant. Preparing soldiers for combat deployment required attention to every detail, from individual marksmanship to complex unit operations. Lives depended on getting it right. Over the next 6 months, I worked 18-hour days developing training scenarios, coordinating with other units, and ensuring every soldier in the battalion met the standards required for deployment. It was exhausting, demanding work that required constant attention to detail and the ability to solve problems under pressure. The final evaluation exercise was conducted at the National Training Center in California, a sprawling desert facility where military units face off against professional opposing forces trained to fight like enemy combatants. It was as close to combat as training could get, with live ammunition, realistic casualties, and scenarios designed to test every aspect of unit performance. Our battalion performed exceptionally, earning commendation from the evaluators and demonstrating readiness for deployment. More importantly, the soldiers were confident in their abilities and prepared for the challenges they would face overseas. Lieutenant Colonel Hayes pulled me aside after the final after-action review, his expression serious but satisfied. Outstanding work, Major. That was exactly what this battalion needed. Thank you, sir. The soldiers did the hard work. They did, but leadership made the difference. I'm recommending you for command of Alpha Company when Captain Williams deploys with the battalion. Interested? Company command was the holy grail for field-grade officers, the position that separated those destined for senior leadership from those who would remain staff officers for the remainder of their careers. It was an opportunity I had dreamed of but never assumed would come. Yes, sir. Absolutely. Good. You've earned it. Command was different from any position I had held before. Instead of being responsible for analyzing information or coordinating with other units, I was responsible for people, their training, their welfare, their families, their careers. Every decision I made affected real lives in immediate and lasting ways. The deployment to Afghanistan as a company commander was my third, but the first where the success or failure of the mission rested entirely on my shoulders. Alpha Company was tasked with providing intelligence support to multiple units across a wide area of operations, requiring careful coordination and constant attention to changing priorities. Our forward operating base was a collection of concrete and steel buildings surrounded by walls and wire, home to several hundred soldiers from different units and nations. It was a small city with its own culture, rules, and rhythms that had to be understood and navigated carefully.
My company was spread across multiple locations, with teams embedded with infantry units and others working at higher headquarters. Keeping them connected, supplied, and focused on the mission required constant communication and frequent travel to their positions. The work was dangerous and demanding, but the soldiers of Alpha Company performed magnificently. They provided intelligence that shaped major operations, identified threats that saved American lives, and maintained the highest standards of professionalism under difficult conditions. 3 months into the deployment, one of my teams was involved in a complex operation to capture a high-value target in a remote valley. The intelligence was time-sensitive, and the target was expected to move locations within hours of the planned operation. Staff Sergeant Michael Rodriguez, my senior analyst on the team, called me on the secure radio network at 0300 hours with an update on the developing situation. His team had been working for 18 straight hours analyzing intelligence and preparing for the mission. "Ma'am, we've got good intelligence on the target location, but there's something that doesn't fit the pattern. The local informants are reporting more security than we expected, and the target's behavior suggests he might know we're coming." I was in my small office at the main base, surrounded by maps and intelligence reports, trying to piece together the full picture of what my teams were seeing across the area of operations. The radio crackled with static and the distant sound of helicopters. "What's your recommendation, Rodriguez?" "I think we need to delay the operation and gather more intelligence. Something feels wrong about this, and I don't want to walk the assault team into an ambush." It was a difficult decision. The target was important, the intelligence window was closing, and delaying the operation meant potentially losing the opportunity entirely. But Rodriguez was an experienced analyst whose instincts I trusted completely.
Understood. I'll recommend we delay and gather more intelligence. Good call, Rodriguez. Roger, ma'am. I'll keep working the problem. I called the operations center and spoke with the battalion commander, explaining the situation and recommending the delay. It was not a popular decision with higher headquarters, who were under pressure to capture the target before he disappeared again. 12 hours later, a reconnaissance team found evidence of a carefully planned ambush at the target location. The operation had been compromised, and proceeding as originally planned would have resulted in American casualties. Rodriguez's instincts had been exactly right, and his willingness to speak up had probably saved lives. "Staff Sergeant Rodriguez," I said when I visited his team the next day, "outstanding work yesterday. That was exactly the kind of analysis that makes the difference between success and disaster." "Thank you, ma'am. Just doing my job." "No, you did more than your job. You made a hard call under pressure and you were right. That's leadership." The Bronze Star with Valor device came at the end of the deployment. Recognition for actions during a complex operation where my company provided critical intelligence support under dangerous conditions. The award was significant, but more meaningful was the knowledge that my soldiers had performed exceptionally and returned home safely. The ceremony was held at Bagram Airfield, with soldiers from multiple units in attendance. As the general pinned the medal to my uniform, I thought about the journey that had brought me to this moment. From Patricia's dining room to a stage in Afghanistan, surrounded by soldiers who had become family. Master Sergeant Torres stood in the front row, her face beaming with pride. After the ceremony, she approached me with a small package wrapped in brown paper. "From the soldiers of Alpha Company, ma'am," she said, handing me the gift. Inside was a plaque with the company crest and a simple inscription. "To the commander who led from the front and brought us all home. Alpha Company, Afghanistan, 2018. "Torres, this is beautiful. Thank you." "They wanted you to know what your leadership meant to them, ma'am. Not many commanders earned that kind of respect." That night, I called my parents from the morale tent, using the same satellite phone I had used during my first deployment years before. It was morning in Virginia, and I could hear birds singing in the background. "Congratulations on your award, honey," my mother said, her voice warm with pride. "We saw the photos you sent." "Thanks, Mom. It feels good to be recognized, but more important that everyone came home safely." "Your father wants to know when you'll be back stateside." 2 more weeks, then back to Fort Campbell. I'm looking forward to sleeping in my own bed." "Will you get some leave time?" "Yes, I'm planning to come home for a couple weeks before I start my new assignment." "New assignment?" I hadn't told them yet about my selection for the War College, the advanced education program that prepared officers for senior leadership positions. It was an honor that came with the expectation of continued service and increasing responsibility. "I've been selected for the Army War College in Pennsylvania. It's a year of graduate-level education in strategy and national security." "That sounds important."
It is, Mom. It means the Army is investing in my future and expects me to serve in senior positions. We're proud of you, Celeste, so proud of everything you've accomplished. After I hung up, I sat in the quiet tent reflecting on how far I had traveled from the young woman who had been dismissed as too weak for the real world. The real world, it turned out, was exactly where I belonged. The War College was a year of intellectual challenge and professional development, bringing together officers from all services and several allied nations. We studied military history, strategic theory, and the complexities of national security in an interconnected world. My classmates were some of the best officers in their respective services, each selected for demonstrated excellence and potential for senior leadership. The discussions were vigorous, the workload demanding, and the expectations high. My thesis focused on intelligence sharing between allies in counterinsurgency operations, drawing on my experiences in Afghanistan and Iraq. It was an opportunity to contribute to the broader understanding of military operations while reflecting on lessons learned during my own deployments. The year passed quickly, filled with research, writing, and the kind of deep thinking that military officers rarely have time for during operational assignments. When graduation approached, I was selected as one of the distinguished graduates, recognition for academic excellence and leadership potential. My parents attended the graduation ceremony, beaming with pride as I received my diploma and the recognition that came with it. They had watched me transform from their uncertain daughter into a confident military officer, and their support had never wavered. After graduation, I was assigned to the Pentagon as a strategic planner, working on policy issues that affected military operations around the world. It was a significant departure from tactical intelligence work, requiring a different perspective and broader understanding of national security challenges. Colonel Diana Walsh was my immediate supervisor, a brilliant strategist who had spent her career moving between operational assignments and policy positions. She had the rare ability to see both the big picture and the critical details, understanding how tactical decisions supported strategic objectives. Major Chen, she said during my first week, as we reviewed classified assessments in her secure office. Your job here is different from what you've done before. Instead of analyzing current threats, you'll be thinking about future conflicts and how we prepare for them. It requires a different mindset. What kind of different, ma'am? Operational intelligence is about answering specific questions with available information. Strategic planning is about asking the right questions when the information doesn't exist yet. She paused, looking out the small window that offered a view of the Potomac River. It's about being comfortable with uncertainty while making recommendations that affect thousands of soldiers.
Marcus Thompson, at a conference on counterterrorism policy hosted by Georgetown University, he was a professor of international relations, specializing in Middle Eastern politics. And his presentation on regional security challenges was both insightful and engaging. Interesting perspective on Iranian influence operations, I said during the coffee break, approaching him near the registration table. He turned, extending his hand with a warm smile. Thank you. I noticed you asked some very pointed questions during the Q&A session. Military background? Army. Strategic planning at the Pentagon. Ah, that explains the operational perspective. I'm Marcus Thompson, Georgetown faculty. Celeste Chen. And yes, I tend to think about implementation when academics discuss theory. We talked for 20 minutes about the intersection of policy and practice, finding common ground despite our different backgrounds. When the conference resumed, I found myself looking forward to his next presentation and wondering if he might be interested in continuing our conversation over dinner. He was. Our first date was at a small restaurant in Georgetown, where we spent 3 hours talking about everything except work. He was funny, intelligent, and genuinely interested in understanding the world from perspectives different from his own. When he walked me to my car, I realized I hadn't thought about military obligations or strategic planning for the entire evening. I had a wonderful time, he said, his hand resting lightly on my arm. Would you like to do this again? I would, but I should mention that my schedule can be unpredictable. Military planning doesn't follow normal business hours. I understand. Academic schedules aren't exactly conventional either. He smiled, and I noticed the small lines around his eyes that suggested someone who laughed frequently. We'll figure it out. Over the following months, we did figure it out. Marcus understood the demands of my career in ways that previous relationships had struggled with.
He never complained when I had to cancel dinner plans for crisis briefings or when my phone buzzed with urgent messages during quiet evenings together. More importantly, he respected my work without trying to understand every classified detail. He knew I couldn't discuss specific operations or intelligence assessments, but he valued the perspective I brought to our conversations about international affairs and policy challenges. "You see things differently than most people in academia," he told me one evening as we walked along the waterfront in Old Town Alexandria. "There's a practical element to your thinking that comes from understanding consequences." Different how? Academic discussions can become very theoretical, focused on ideal solutions rather than achievable ones. You always ask whether something can actually be implemented and what it would cost in human terms. I thought about his observation as we watched boats navigate the Potomac in the fading light. When you sent soldiers into harm's way, you develop a different relationship with abstract policy discussions. Every strategic decision has tactical implications for real people. That's exactly what I mean. It's a valuable perspective that academia sometimes lacks. Our relationship deepened gradually, built on mutual respect and genuine affection rather than dramatic romantic gestures. Marcus met my parents during a weekend visit to Richmond, charming my mother with his knowledge of Virginia history, and engaging my father in long discussions about international economics. "I like him," my mother said, as we cleaned up after Sunday dinner, while Marcus and my father continued their conversation on the back porch. "He seems to understand you." "What do you mean?" "He doesn't try to change you or make you smaller to fit his expectations. He appreciates who you are." She paused, looking out the kitchen window at the two men deep in conversation. "That's rarer than it should be." I knew she was thinking about David and his family, about the version of myself I had almost accepted in order to please people who would never truly value me. The contrast was stark and instructive. Marcus proposed during my second year at the Pentagon, after a quiet dinner at the same restaurant where we'd had our first date. The ring was simple and elegant, chosen with the understanding that military life required practical considerations, even for sentimental gestures. "I know your career will take you places I can't always follow," he said, holding my hands across the small table. "But I want to build a life with you, wherever that leads us. Even if it means moving every few years and dealing with deployments, especially then. I've watched you serve something larger than yourself, and I want to be part of supporting that service." We were married 6 months later at a small ceremony at Fort Belvoir, with my parents, his family, and a handful of close friends. Colonel Walsh served as my sponsor, and Marcus's colleague from Georgetown performed the ceremony in the historic chapel overlooking the Potomac. The reception was held at the Officers' Club, a modest celebration that reflected our desire for simplicity and our shared understanding that marriage was the beginning of a partnership rather than the culmination of a romance. My Army friends mixed easily with Marcus's academic colleagues, finding common ground despite their different worlds. "To Celeste and Marcus," Colonel Walsh said during the toasts, raising her glass of champagne, "two people who understand that the strongest relationships are built on mutual respect and shared commitment to something larger than themselves." My promotion to lieutenant colonel came with assignment to Fort Leavenworth as an instructor at the Command and General Staff College, the Army's premier professional military education institution. It was an honor to be selected for a teaching position, responsible for developing critical thinking skills in mid-career officers from around the world. My primary course focused on intelligence operations and analysis, drawing on my operational experience to illustrate theoretical concepts with practical examples. The students were majors and lieutenant colonels with significant experience, requiring instruction that respected their knowledge while challenging them to think more broadly about complex problems. Intelligence analysis is not about being right, I told my first class, a diverse group of officers from multiple services and allied nations. It's about providing decision makers with the best assessment possible given available information and acknowledging the limits of what we know. The classroom discussions were vigorous and enlightening, with students bringing perspectives shaped by service in different conflicts and cultural contexts. One of my students was Major Sarah Kim, a military intelligence officer who reminded me of myself a decade earlier. Brilliant, dedicated, but struggling with self-doubt about her ability to contribute meaningfully to senior-level operations. "Ma'am," she said after class one afternoon, "can I ask you about something?" "Of course, Major. What's on your mind?" "How do you build confidence in your assessments when you're dealing with incomplete information and senior officers who expect definitive answers?" It was a question I had wrestled with throughout my career, the challenge of providing useful analysis while acknowledging uncertainty. The answer had evolved through years of experience and hard-learned lessons. "You build confidence through process, not certainty," I said, gesturing for her to sit down in my small office.
Good analysis follows consistent methodology, considers alternative explanations, and clearly states assumptions and limitations. Senior leaders don't need you to be psychic. They need you to be thorough and honest about what you know and what you don't. But what if you're wrong? What if your assessment leads to a bad decision? Then you learn from it and do better next time. The fear of being wrong can be paralyzing, but the alternative is providing no assessment at all, which is worse than providing an imperfect one. I thought about my own moments of uncertainty, the times when incomplete intelligence had required difficult judgment calls. The goal is not perfection. The goal is providing the best assessment possible with available information and improving your methodology over time. She nodded, but I could see the doubt still lingering in her expression. It was the same doubt I had carried for years, the voice that whispered I wasn't qualified for the responsibilities I was given. "Major Kim, can I tell you something that took me too long to learn?" "Yes, ma'am." "Your value as an intelligence officer is not measured by how often you're right about specific predictions. It's measured by how well you help decision makers understand the information environment they're operating in. Sometimes that means highlighting uncertainties rather than providing false confidence." Over the course of the academic year, I watched Major Kim grow into a more confident and thoughtful analyst. She learned to trust her methodology while acknowledging limitations, to provide useful assessments without claiming false certainty. It was rewarding to see talented officers develop their capabilities and prepare for increased responsibilities. My marriage to Marcus deepened during our time at Leavenworth, away from the intense operational tempo of Washington assignments. We developed routines and shared interests, exploring the history of the Kansas Plains and hosting dinner parties that brought together military officers and academic faculty. "You're a natural teacher," Marcus observed one evening after we had hosted several of my students for dinner. "I've watched you in academic settings before, but seeing you mentor these officers is different. You're not just conveying information, you're developing people." "It's the most rewarding assignment I've had," I admitted. "Operational tours are important, but this feels like investing in the future of the institution." "Have you thought about what comes next after Leavenworth?" I had been thinking about it, wrestling with decisions that would shape the remainder of my military career. My assignment officer had mentioned several possibilities, including command positions and senior staff roles that would prepare me for promotion to colonel. There are options: brigade command, Pentagon staff, maybe a fellowship program. Each path leads to different opportunities and challenges. What do you want to do? It was a simple question with a complex answer. What I wanted was to continue serving in positions where I could make meaningful contributions while continuing to grow as a leader. But wants had to be balanced against needs, both institutional and personal. "I want to command again," I said finally, "but at a higher level, with broader responsibilities. I want to see if I can apply everything I've learned to leading larger organizations. Then that's what you should pursue." The phone call came on a Thursday evening in March, while Marcus and I were planning our spring garden and discussing summer travel possibilities. My assignment officer was calling with news about my next assignment. "Lieutenant Colonel Chen, congratulations! You've been selected for command of the 313th Military Intelligence Battalion at Fort Gordon. It's a significant assignment with broad responsibilities for intelligence training and operations." Battalion command was a major milestone, the position that would determine whether I had the potential for promotion to senior ranks.
The 313th was a large organization with multiple companies and complex missions, requiring leadership skills I had been developing throughout my career. Thank you, sir. When do I need to report? June 1st. You'll have about 60 days to complete the transition with the outgoing commander before assuming responsibility. After I hung up, Marcus opened a bottle of wine to celebrate, understanding that this assignment represented both recognition of past performance and preparation for future opportunities. To Lieutenant Colonel Chen, and to the soldiers who will be fortunate enough to serve under your command. Two partnerships that make everything possible, I replied, touching my glass to his. The change of command ceremony at Fort Gordon was held on a sweltering Georgia morning, with soldiers from across the battalion formed in precise ranks despite the oppressive humidity. The outgoing commander, Lieutenant Colonel Michael Patterson, was a respected officer who had led the battalion through a successful deployment and significant organizational changes. The 313th is a good unit with a strong tradition, he told me during the private transition meeting in his office, soon to be mine. The soldiers are professionals who take pride in their work. Give them clear guidance and consistent standards, and they'll accomplish any mission you give them. Any particular challenges I should be aware of? The usual ones: budget constraints, personnel turbulence, competing priorities from higher headquarters. Nothing you haven't dealt with before, just at a larger scale.
We hosted students from across the Army and allied nations, providing education that would shape intelligence operations for years to come. My personal investment in the training mission was shaped by memories of my own development as an intelligence officer, the mentors who had guided my growth, and the lessons learned through trial and error. I wanted to provide the kind of leadership and instruction that would prepare students for the challenges they would face in operational assignments. The goal is not just to teach you techniques, I told a class of newly arrived students during their orientation briefing. The goal is to develop your judgment, your ability to think critically about complex problems, and communicate your assessments effectively. Technical skills can be taught quickly. Professional judgment takes years to develop. The students came from diverse backgrounds and experience levels, from recent college graduates to senior non-commissioned officers with multiple deployments. Teaching them required adapting instruction to different learning styles while maintaining consistent standards for performance. One of my instructors was Captain Jennifer Walsh, a former student of mine at Leavenworth who had requested assignment to the 313th specifically to work on training and doctrine development. She brought energy and innovation to curriculum development, finding ways to incorporate emerging technologies while preserving fundamental analytical principles. "Ma'am," she said during one of our weekly staff meetings, "I've been working on a new exercise that simulates the information environment students will face in contemporary operations. It's more complex than our current scenarios, but more realistic." "Tell me about it." Instead of analyzing a single threat stream, students have to integrate information from multiple sources while dealing with contradictory reports and time pressure. It's designed to replicate the cognitive load they'll experience in actual operations. Sounds challenging. How are the students responding? Mixed results so far. Some struggle initially, but show significant improvement over time. Others find it overwhelming and revert to simple analytical frameworks that don't capture the full complexity. That's probably realistic. Not every student will develop advanced analytical capabilities, but we need to identify those who can and give them the tools they need to succeed. The exercise Captain Walsh developed became a cornerstone of our advanced training program, challenging students to develop the kind of sophisticated analytical skills required for senior intelligence positions. It was demanding instruction that reflected the reality of contemporary military operations. My own professional development continued through the Army's distance learning programs and conferences focused on emerging threats and technologies. The intelligence field was evolving rapidly, requiring continuous education to maintain relevance and effectiveness. Marcus had adapted well to military life at Fort Gordon, finding opportunities to lecture at nearby universities while continuing his research on Middle Eastern politics. Our marriage had strengthened through shared experiences and mutual support for each other's professional ambitions. "You're different when you're in command," he observed one evening as we walked around the small lake near our quarters. "More confident, more decisive. It suits you." "Different how?" You've always been competent and professional, but now there's an authority that comes from knowing you belong in the position. It's not just about doing the job well anymore, you are the job. I thought about his observation, recognizing the truth in it. Command had required integrating all aspects of my experience into a coherent leadership philosophy, finding my authentic voice as a senior military officer. I think I finally stopped asking permission to be who I am, I said, remembering Colonel Walsh's advice from years earlier about leadership requiring self-knowledge and confidence. That's exactly what I mean. You don't second-guess yourself anymore. You make decisions and stand behind them. The battalion's deployment notification came during my second year in command, a mission to Afghanistan in support of the ongoing advise and assist operations. It would be my fourth deployment, but my first as a battalion commander, responsible for leading a large organization through complex operations in a challenging environment. The preparation phase required months of intensive training, equipment validation, and individual soldier readiness assessments. Every aspect of the deployment had to be planned and rehearsed, from logistics operations to communication procedures to emergency response protocols. This deployment is different from previous ones, I told the battalion during the pre-deployment briefing, addressing soldiers and family members in the post-gymnasium. We're not going as individual augmentees or small teams. We're going as a unit, with shared responsibilities and mutual accountability. Every soldier's performance affects the entire battalion's success. The families in the audience represented the personal cost of military service, spouses and children who would maintain households and communities while their soldiers were overseas. Their support was essential to mission success, and their welfare was a command responsibility that extended beyond the soldiers themselves. For the family members here tonight, I continued, you are part of this team. Your support enables our soldiers to focus on their mission, and our Family Readiness Group will ensure you have the resources and information you need while we're deployed. The Family Readiness Group was led by Marcus and Command Sergeant Major Rivera's wife, experienced military spouses who understood the challenges of deployment and the importance of maintaining strong communication between the deployed unit and the home station. Our deployment to Afghanistan was based at Bagram Airfield, the massive logistics hub that supported operations across the country. The 313th was responsible for intelligence operations across multiple provinces, requiring coordination with numerous military and civilian organizations. My command post was located in a converted shipping container, reinforced with concrete barriers and equipped with the communication systems necessary to maintain contact with dispersed elements of the battalion. It was a functional workspace that reflected the reality of expeditionary military operations. The mission was complex and demanding, requiring the battalion to provide intelligence support to conventional forces while also conducting specialized operations against high-value targets. My soldiers were embedded with units across the area of operations, from small outposts in remote valleys to major headquarters in urban centers. Managing a dispersed organization in a combat environment required constant communication and careful attention to the welfare of soldiers operating in isolated locations. I spent most of my time traveling between positions, visiting my soldiers and ensuring they had the resources and support necessary to accomplish their missions. Staff Sergeant Maria Santos was one of my most experienced analysts, leading a team embedded with an infantry battalion, conducting operations in a particularly dangerous province. Her team had been responsible for several successful operations, but the stress of continuous operations was beginning to affect unit morale. "Ma'am," she said during one of my visits to her forward operating base, "the pace has been relentless for the past 6 weeks. My soldiers are tired, and the infantry unit we're supporting keeps requesting more analysis than we can provide with current personnel. What do you need?" "Either more analysts or a reduction in requests. We're maintaining quality, but it's taking longer to complete assessments because everyone is working 18-hour days. I can get you 2 more analysts from the main base, but it will take a week to arrange transportation and security clearances. Can you maintain current operations until then?" "Yes, ma'am, but after that, we need to establish more sustainable battle rhythm. This level of operations tempo isn't maintainable long-term." It was a conversation I had with multiple team leaders, the challenge of balancing mission requirements with soldier welfare. The battalion was performing exceptionally, but success came at a cost that had to be managed carefully to prevent burnout and maintain effectiveness.
The Bronze Star with V device came after a particularly complex operation, in which the battalion provided intelligence support for a time-sensitive mission to capture multiple high-value targets simultaneously. The operation required coordination between several military units and intelligence agencies, with my soldiers playing critical roles in planning and execution. The ceremony was held at Bagram, with soldiers from across the coalition in attendance. As the general pinned the medal to my uniform, I thought about the journey that had brought me to this moment and the soldiers whose exceptional performance had made the recognition possible. The 313th Military Intelligence Battalion has consistently demonstrated exceptional performance under demanding conditions, the general said during his remarks. Lieutenant Colonel Chen's leadership has been instrumental in the unit's success and the broader mission accomplishment. After the ceremony, Command Sergeant Major Rivera approached me with a smile that reflected his own pride in the battalion's performance. "Ma'am, the soldiers wanted me to tell you how proud they are to serve in this unit. They know the recognition reflects their hard work as much as your leadership."
They're right, Sergeant Major. This belongs to all of us. The deployment ended successfully, with the battalion returning to Fort Gordon having accomplished all assigned missions without losing a single soldier. It was an outcome that reflected careful planning, competent execution, and a measure of good fortune that every commander hopes for but cannot guarantee. The homecoming ceremony was held in the same gymnasium where we had conducted the pre-deployment briefing 18 months earlier. Families filled the bleachers, holding signs and balloons, waiting for soldiers who had been gone too long and missed too many milestones. Marcus was waiting near the front, holding a small American flag and wearing the proud expression of someone who had maintained the home front while his spouse served overseas. When I found him in the crowd after the official ceremony, his embrace felt like coming home to everything that mattered most. "Welcome home, Lieutenant Colonel Chen," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I missed you more than I knew how to express in emails." "I missed you too, more than I thought possible." The promotion to colonel came 2 years later, recognition of successful command performance and potential for senior leadership positions. The ceremony was held at Fort Gordon with my parents, Marcus, and soldiers from the 313th in attendance. My new assignment was to the Pentagon as a senior strategic planner, responsible for policy development related to intelligence operations and emerging threats. It was a return to Washington, but at a much higher level, with responsibilities that affected military planning across all services. The work required a different perspective than tactical or operational assignments, focusing on long-term trends and institutional challenges rather than immediate operational requirements. My office was larger than before, with windows that offered a view of the Arlington Cemetery and the city beyond. Colonel Walsh, now a brigadier general, was my supervisor again, leading a directorate responsible for some of the most sensitive planning in the Department of Defense. She had followed my career with interest, providing guidance and opportunities that had contributed to my professional development. "Colonel Chen," she said during my first week back in the Pentagon, "your operational experience combined with your educational background makes you uniquely qualified for the challenges we're facing. The threats are more complex than they were when you were here as a major, and the policy implications are more significant." What are the primary areas of focus? Emerging technologies, great power competition, and the intersection of conventional and irregular threats. We need strategic frameworks that account for rapid technological change while maintaining traditional military capabilities. The work was intellectually demanding and professionally satisfying, requiring deep analysis of trends that would shape military operations for decades. My contributions influence policy decisions at the highest levels of government, affecting how the military prepared for future conflicts. My personal life had achieved a stability that had eluded me during earlier career phases. Marcus and I had purchased a house in Arlington with a garden where we could grow vegetables and herbs, creating a retreat from the intensity of our professional responsibilities. We had also begun discussing starting a family, a conversation that required careful consideration of career timing and personal priorities. Military service had always demanded sacrifices, but some opportunities had windows that couldn't be reopened indefinitely. "I know your career is at a critical point," Marcus said one evening as we worked in the garden, planting tomatoes in the warm spring soil. "But I also know that family is important to you, and there's never going to be a perfect time." "I've been thinking about it too.
The timing would be challenging, but maybe that's always true for military families. What does your heart tell you? I thought about the question, about the life we had built together and the future we envisioned. My career had provided purpose and fulfillment, but it had also required constant focus on professional obligations at the expense of personal relationships. My heart tells me that I want to build something with you that goes beyond our individual careers. I want to create a family and see what kind of parents we can be. Then let's do it. We'll figure out the logistics as we go. The pregnancy announcement came during my second year as a colonel, requiring careful coordination with my supervisor to ensure mission continuity while managing medical appointments and preparing for maternity leave. The military had become more accommodating for pregnant officers over the years, but senior positions still required careful planning to minimize disruption. General Walsh was supportive and practical, helping to arrange coverage for my responsibilities while ensuring I remained engaged in important projects. Her own experience as a senior female officer provided valuable guidance for navigating organizational expectations. The key is maintaining your professional reputation while taking care of your health, she advised during one of our regular meetings. Don't try to prove anything by working longer hours or taking on additional responsibilities. Focus on doing your current job well and preparing for a smooth transition. My daughter Sarah was born on a crisp October morning at Walter Reed Medical Center after 18 hours of labor that tested every lesson I had learned about perseverance and mental toughness. Marcus was an attentive and nervous father-to-be, timing contractions with the same precision he brought to academic research. Holding my daughter for the first time, I experienced an emotion more powerful than any I had known. Love was too simple a word for the fierce protective instinct and overwhelming tenderness that filled my chest as I looked at her perfect features and tiny fingers. "She's beautiful," Marcus whispered, tears streaming down his face as he touched her forehead with infinite gentleness. "Look what we made together." The maternity leave passed too quickly, filled with sleepless nights and the steep learning curve of new parenthood. Military families face unique challenges when balancing career demands with family responsibilities, requiring support systems and careful planning to succeed at both. My return to duty was facilitated by excellent childcare on base and Marcus's flexible academic schedule, which allowed him to handle many of the daylight responsibilities while I managed evening and weekend care. It was an arrangement that required constant communication and mutual support. The promotion to brigadier general came as a surprise, earlier in my career than I had anticipated. The ceremony was held at the Pentagon, with Sarah sleeping peacefully in Marcus's arms as I took the oath and received my first star. General Walsh administered the oath, her own journey to senior ranks having paved the way for officers like me to advance to positions that had once been close to women. The symbolism was not lost on either of us, nor on the young female officers who attended the ceremony. "Brigadier General Chen," she said, after pinning the star to my uniform, "your example demonstrates that excellence and dedication are rewarded regardless of gender or background. You've earned this through performance, and you'll succeed because you understand that leadership is about serving others." My new assignment was as the Deputy Commanding General of the Army Intelligence and Security Command, responsible for operations across multiple installations and thousands of soldiers. It was a significant increase in responsibility and authority, requiring skills I had been developing throughout my career. The headquarters was located at Fort Belvoir, allowing Marcus and I to maintain our home in Arlington while providing stability for Sarah's early years. The work required extensive travel and long hours, but it also provided opportunities to shape intelligence operations at the institutional level. My primary responsibilities included overseeing training programs, modernization efforts, and operational support to military units worldwide. The scope was global, with units under my authority deployed to every continent and engaged in missions ranging from counterterrorism to strategic intelligence collection. The work was demanding but fulfilling, allowing me to apply lessons learned throughout my career to challenges facing the entire intelligence community. My operational experience provided credibility with subordinate commanders, while my strategic planning background enabled effective interaction with senior leadership. General Patricia Morrison was the commanding general, a two-star officer who had spent her career in military intelligence and understood the complexities of managing large, dispersed organizations. She provided excellent mentorship and gradual delegation of authority that prepared me for potential future command positions. The transition from colonel to general is significant, she explained during one of our weekly meetings in her office. As a colonel, you're responsible for executing policy developed by others. As a general, you are responsible for developing policy that others will execute. It requires a different perspective and broader consideration of second and third order effects. What advice do you have for making that transition successfully? Listen more than you talk, especially in your first year. You have excellent operational experience, but you're still learning about strategic leadership. Build relationships with your peers and other services and government agencies. Understand that your decisions affect not just military units, but also national policy objectives.
Military intelligence operations required coordination with numerous agencies and departments, each with different priorities and organizational cultures. My relationship with Marcus evolved as we both adjusted to the demands of senior-level responsibilities. His research had gained national attention, leading to consulting opportunities with government agencies and think tanks. Sarah was growing into a curious and energetic toddler who brought joy and exhaustion in equal measure. "I'm proud of what we've built together," Marcus said one evening as we watched Sarah play in our backyard, chasing fireflies in the fading summer light. "Not just our careers, but our family and our partnership." Even with all the complications, the travel, the long hours, the constant pressure, especially because of those things, anyone can have a relationship when life is easy. Building something strong while managing difficult circumstances requires real commitment. I thought about his words as I watched Sarah discover the world around her with the fearless curiosity of early childhood. My own journey had been shaped by challenges that had seemed insurmountable at the time, but had ultimately contributed to my growth and development. The phone call that changed everything came on a Tuesday morning in March, while I was reviewing intelligence assessments in my office at Fort Belvoir. The caller was my assignment officer with news about an upcoming vacancy that would represent the pinnacle of my military career. "Ma'am, you are being considered for promotion to Major General and assignment as the Commanding General of the Army Intelligence and Security Command. It's a significant opportunity with broad responsibilities across the intelligence enterprise." Two-star rank was rarely achieved by officers of any background, representing the culmination of decades of service and exceptional performance. For a woman, it carried additional significance as evidence that the military was genuinely committed to promoting officers based on merit rather than traditional expectations. "Thank you, sir. When will the selection be announced?" "Next month. If selected, you would assume command in approximately 6 months, following the current general's retirement." After hanging up, I sat quietly in my office contemplating the trajectory that had brought me to this moment. From Patricia's dining room table to potential command of one of the Army's premier organizations, the journey had been longer and more challenging than I could have imagined as a young woman seeking her place in the world. The selection was announced in April, with the promotion ceremony scheduled for June and change of command in August. Marcus was thrilled by the recognition, understanding that it represented validation of everything I had worked toward throughout my military career. "Major General Chen," he said with a smile as we celebrated with champagne in our kitchen, Sarah playing at our feet with her favorite toys. "It has a nice sound to it. It's surreal. I keep expecting someone to call and say there's been a mistake." "There's no mistake. You've earned every promotion through exceptional performance and dedicated service. This is the logical culmination of an outstanding career." My parents were equally proud, although my mother admitted to some anxiety about the increased responsibilities and visibility that came with senior rank. They had watched my transformation from uncertain young woman to confident military leader, supporting my choices even when they didn't fully understand the path I had chosen. "We always knew you were special," my father said during dinner at their house in Richmond, Sarah contentedly eating mashed potatoes in her high chair. "But seeing you achieve this level of success is beyond what we could have imagined."
The military gave me opportunities to discover capabilities I didn't know I had, I replied, thinking about the mentors and experiences that had shaped my development. But your support made it possible to pursue those opportunities without worrying about having a place to come home to. The promotion ceremony was held at the Pentagon, with senior officers from across the military and government in attendance. Sarah was old enough to participate in the ceremony, helping Marcus pin the second star to my uniform while photographers captured the moment for history. As I took the oath of office, I thought about all the people who had contributed to my journey: the drill sergeants who had taught me discipline, the commanders who had provided opportunities for growth, the soldiers who had trusted my leadership in difficult circumstances. None of us succeeds alone, and my achievements belong to everyone who had invested in my development. General Morrison's retirement ceremony was held 2 weeks later, a formal recognition of her distinguished career and contributions to military intelligence. As she passed the organizational colors to me during the change of command, I felt the full weight of responsibility settling onto my shoulders, like a familiar but heavier uniform. The Army Intelligence and Security Command encompassed installations across the globe, with over 20,000 soldiers and civilians under my authority. The mission spanned from basic training programs to the most classified operations, requiring constant balance between competing priorities and evolving threats. My first major challenge came within months of assuming command when a cyber attack against one of our facilities required immediate response and long-term security improvements. The incident highlighted vulnerabilities in systems I was responsible for protecting, while also demonstrating the competence and dedication of the soldiers under my command. The response required coordination with multiple agencies, briefings to senior government officials, and implementation of enhanced security measures across the command. It was exactly the kind of complex, high-stakes situation that tested every aspect of senior leadership. Marcus had taken a sabbatical from Georgetown to support my transition to command, managing our household and Sarah's needs while I worked 16-hour days addressing the crisis. His sacrifice enabled me to focus completely on my responsibilities without worrying about personal obligations. "You're in your element," he observed one evening as I finally returned home after a particularly intense day of briefings and decision-making. "Watching you handle this crisis, I see the leader you've become over all these years." "It feels different from any command I've held before," I admitted, sitting down at our kitchen table while Sarah colored in her favorite book nearby. "The decisions affect so many more people, and the consequences extend far beyond military operations." "Different how?" "Every choice ripples through the entire intelligence community. When I was a battalion commander, my decisions affected 400 soldiers. Now they affect national security policy and international relationships. That's why they selected you for this position. They needed someone with the experience and judgment to handle those kinds of decisions." The command tenure was marked by significant modernization efforts, implementation of new technologies, and adaptation to evolving threats that hadn't existed when I began my military career. Leading organizational change while maintaining operational effectiveness required careful planning and constant communication with subordinate commanders. My relationships with senior leaders across the military and government deepened during this period, as I participated in policy discussions and strategic planning that shaped intelligence operations for years to come. The perspectives I brought from operational experience proved valuable in debates that might have otherwise remained purely theoretical. Sarah was growing into a curious and energetic child who understood that mommy had an important job that sometimes required travel and long hours. Military children develop resilience and adaptability that serve them throughout their lives, but they also make sacrifices that civilian families never face. "Mommy, why do you wear that uniform?" she asked one morning as I prepared for an important briefing, her small hands touching the ribbons on my chest. "Because I'm a soldier, sweetheart. My job is to keep our country safe and take care of other soldiers." "Like how you take care of me and Daddy?" "Something like that, but with many more people." She seemed satisfied with the explanation, returning to her breakfast with the easy acceptance of childhood. But I knew that as she grew older, the questions would become more complex and the answers more difficult to provide. The promotion to lieutenant general came during my second year in command, recognition of successful leadership and preparation for even greater responsibilities. The third star represented entry into the most senior ranks of military leadership, with only a few officers achieving that level throughout their careers. The ceremony was smaller this time, reflecting the rarity of three-star rank and the select group of people qualified to participate in such occasions. Sarah was 5 years old now, old enough to understand that this was something special and important to our family. As the third star was pinned to my uniform, I thought about the young woman who had sat in Patricia's dining room 25 years earlier, dismissed as too weak for the real world.
The real world had turned out to be exactly where I belonged, but it had taken decades of service to fully understand that truth. Marcus's pride was evident in every photograph, every conversation with friends and colleagues who had followed my career progression with interest and admiration. Academic institutions had begun inviting me to speak about leadership and national security, adding another dimension to my professional responsibilities. My parents attended the ceremony despite their advancing age and my father's recent health concerns. Watching them beam with pride as their daughter received her third star, I reflected on the journey we had all traveled together, from uncertainty to accomplishment. "I wish your grandmother could see this," my mother whispered as we posed for family photos after the ceremony. "She always said you had something special, even when you were little." The memory of my grandmother's encouragement decades earlier brought unexpected tears to my eyes. She had seen potential that others missed, providing support when I needed it most without expecting anything in return except my best effort. My new assignment was as the Deputy Chief of Staff for Intelligence at the Pentagon, responsible for intelligence policy and operations across all Army units worldwide. It was a position that influenced strategic planning at the highest levels, requiring interaction with civilian leadership and international partners. The work was intensely focused on emerging threats and technological developments that would shape military operations for decades. Artificial intelligence, cyber warfare, and great power competition required new approaches to intelligence collection and analysis that built on traditional foundations while embracing innovative methods. My daily routine involved briefings to senior government officials, coordination with intelligence agencies, and oversight of programs that couldn't be discussed in public but were essential to national security. The classification levels and sensitivity of the information I handled reflected the trust placed in my judgment and discretion. Sarah was 7 years old when the diagnosis came, delivered by doctors at Walter Reed with the clinical precision that military medical professionals use to convey difficult news. Pancreatic cancer, stage 4, with a prognosis measured in months rather than years. The disease was aggressive and had progressed beyond the point where treatment could offer more than palliative care. I was 47 years old, at the peak of my career, with responsibilities that affected thousands of soldiers and national security operations around the world. "How long?" Marcus asked, his voice steady despite the shock written across his face. 6 months, perhaps slightly longer with aggressive treatment, the oncologist replied. But the treatment will be difficult and may not provide significant extension of life expectancy. I looked at Sarah, who was coloring in the corner of the hospital room, unaware that her world was about to change in ways she couldn't understand. The fierce protective instinct I had felt since her birth transformed into desperate urgency to arrange everything she would need without me. "What are our options?" I asked, my military training asserting itself even in the face of personal crisis. "We can begin chemotherapy immediately, which may slow the progression and provide some additional time. Radiation therapy might help with pain management. But I want you to understand that we're talking about comfort and time, not cure." The next few weeks were a blur of medical appointments, legal arrangements, and conversations with senior leadership about transitioning my responsibilities. The Army was compassionate and accommodating, providing medical leave while ensuring continuity for critical operations. General Patricia Walsh, now the Chief of Staff of the Army, visited me at home during my second week of treatment. We had maintained our professional relationship and personal friendship throughout our careers, and her support during this crisis meant more than I could express. "How are you handling this?" she asked as we sat in my backyard garden, watching Sarah play on her swing set while Marcus prepared lunch inside. "Some days better than others. The uncertainty is the hardest part.
I can handle difficult missions when I know what I'm facing, but this feels like fighting an enemy I can't see or understand. What do you need from the Army? Time to get my affairs in order and make sure Sarah has everything she needs. Beyond that, I just want to make sure the programs I've been working on continue without disruption. Consider it done. Your legacy in intelligence operations is already secure, but will ensure your current projects are properly transitioned. The chemotherapy was brutal, sapping my energy and making it difficult to maintain the facade of normalcy that I wanted to preserve for Sarah's sake. But it also provided precious additional months to create memories and arrange for her future care. Marcus had accepted a permanent position at Georgetown, providing stability and financial security for Sarah's upbringing. My parents, despite their own aging concerns, committed to being actively involved in her life, ensuring she would grow up knowing where she came from and who her mother had been. My will and estate planning included provisions for Sarah's education, with funds set aside for college and graduate school regardless of her chosen path. I also established a scholarship program for military children, ensuring that other families would benefit from resources I could no longer use personally. The final months were spent creating recordings for Sarah's future milestones, letters to be opened on birthdays and important occasions when my voice might provide comfort and guidance. I wanted her to know how proud I was of her and how much I believed in her potential, even if I couldn't be there to see it realized. "Tell me about Mommy's job," she said one afternoon as we looked through photo albums together, her small fingers tracing pictures of me in various uniforms and locations around the world. Mommy was a general, which means she was in charge of lots and lots of soldiers. Her job was to help them do their work and keep everyone safe. Was she important? Very important, sweetheart. She worked very hard to protect our country and help other people, and she was especially important to Daddy and me because she was the best mommy in the whole world. The letter from Patricia came 3 weeks before I died, delivered by military courier to ensure it reached me promptly. Inside was notification that I had been awarded the Distinguished Service Medal, the military's highest non-combat decoration, in recognition of exceptionally meritorious service to the United States. The citation detailed contributions spanning my entire career, from tactical intelligence operations through strategic policy development. But more meaningful was the personal note Patricia had included, written in her own hand rather than dictated to an aide. "Celeste, your example has inspired a generation of military leaders and opened doors that will benefit countless others. You have served with distinction and honor, proving that excellence recognizes no boundaries except those we impose on ourselves. The Army is better because you chose to serve, and the nation is safer because of your contributions." I died on a Thursday morning in November, at home, surrounded by Marcus, Sarah, and my parents. The sun was shining through the bedroom windows, illuminating the garden where we had spent so many peaceful evenings planning for a future that would unfold without me. The funeral arrangements had been planned months in advance, with military precision applied to ensure every detail honored both my service and my family's wishes. Arlington National Cemetery, with full military honors, followed by a private reception for family and close friends. I had specifically requested that the ceremony be open to any military personnel who wished to attend, understanding that soldiers often find comfort in honoring fallen comrades regardless of personal relationships. What I hadn't anticipated was the scale of response to that invitation. The morning of my funeral dawned clear and cold, with the kind of crisp November air that makes every detail sharp and vivid. Marcus and Sarah arrived at Arlington in the limousine provided by the military, accompanied by my parents and his family members who had traveled from across the country. As their vehicle approached the cemetery, they could see the massive gathering that had assembled to pay their respects. Hundreds of soldiers in dress blue uniforms stood in formation, representing every branch of service and spanning ranks from lieutenant to general. The honor guard was composed of soldiers I had commanded throughout my career, volunteers who had requested the privilege of providing final honors for their former commanding officer. They carried themselves with the precision and dignity that military funerals demand, understanding that their performance would be remembered by everyone present. Marcus held Sarah's hand as they walked toward the gravesite, both of them overwhelmed by the magnitude of respect being demonstrated. Sarah was dressed in a black coat and dress, her small hands clutching the folded flag that would soon be presented to her as my next of kin. Patricia delivered the eulogy, speaking without notes about a career she had witnessed firsthand and contributions that extended far beyond individual recognition or award. Her voice carried across the assembled crowd, reaching soldiers who had served under my command and civilians who had worked alongside me in various assignments. Lieutenant General Celeste Chen embodied the values that define military service. Duty, honor, country were not abstract concepts, but daily practices that guided every decision and shaped every action. She proved that leadership is not about position or authority, but about character and commitment to something larger than oneself.
The honor guard performed their duties with flawless precision, folding the flag that had draped my coffin into the tight triangle that would be presented to my family. Each movement was deliberate and respectful, honoring traditions that connect military funerals across generations and services. When the time came for the presentation, the senior member of the honor guard approached Marcus and Sarah with formal military bearing. His voice was clear and strong as he spoke the words that have comforted military families for generations. On behalf of the President of the United States Army, and a grateful nation, please accept this flag as a symbol of our appreciation for your loved one's honorable and faithful service. Sarah accepted the flag with both hands, her small frame dwarfed by the weight of the gesture and the solemnity of the moment. She held it carefully against her chest, understanding that this represented something important about her mother, even if she couldn't fully comprehend its significance. The three-volley salute echoed across Arlington, with the finality that marks the end of military service. 21 rifles fired in perfect synchronization, the sound carrying across the Potomac and into the city beyond, announcing that another soldier had completed their final mission. As the last notes of taps faded into the November air, something remarkable happened. Without command or coordination, the 500 soldiers in attendance began to render one final salute. Officers and enlisted personnel, active duty and retired, representing decades of military service across multiple conflicts and continents. They held their salutes as Marcus and Sarah placed flowers on the grave, maintaining their positions until the family had departed. It was a gesture of respect that went beyond protocol or regulation, reflecting the personal impact that my service had made on their own careers and lives. Patricia stood with the other senior officers as the ceremony concluded, watching as the massive assembly of military personnel began to disperse. The sight of so many soldiers gathered to honor one of their own demonstrated the bonds that connect military families across all boundaries of rank, service, and generation. Later, at the reception held at Fort Myer, Marcus was approached by countless officers who wanted to share memories and express their condolences. Each conversation revealed different aspects of my service and the impact it had made on people I had served with over the years. "Your wife changed my understanding of what leadership could look like," said Colonel Jennifer Martinez, who had served under my command as a young captain. "She demanded excellence, but also demonstrated genuine care for her soldiers. It shaped how I approach my own command responsibilities. She taught me that intelligence work was about serving something larger than ourselves," added Major Robert Kim, who had been one of my students at the Staff College. "Not just analyzing information, but understanding how that analysis affected real people in dangerous places." The stories continued throughout the afternoon, painting a picture of a career that had touched hundreds of lives in ways both professional and personal. Officers spoke of mentorship received, standards learned, and examples set that had influenced their own service for years afterward. Sarah listened to these conversations with the solemn attention of a child trying to understand adult concepts that were just beyond her comprehension. But she was beginning to grasp that her mother had been someone special, someone who had earned the respect and gratitude of many people. As the reception wound down, Patricia took Marcus aside for a private conversation about Sarah's future and the resources available to military families facing such circumstances. The Army takes care of its own, and arrangements had already been made to ensure Sarah would have educational opportunities and financial support throughout her childhood. Celeste was very thorough in her planning, Patricia explained. She established trust funds for Sarah's education and arranged for ongoing support through military family services. But beyond the financial aspects, there's a network of people who will be part of Sarah's life because they respected and admired her mother. She would appreciate knowing that Sarah will grow up understanding the values that shaped her career, Marcus replied. Military service was such a fundamental part of who Celeste was, and I want Sarah to know that legacy. She will. There are officers throughout the Army who will consider it an honor to serve as mentors and role models for Celeste's daughter. That's part of how military families take care of each other. In the days following the funeral, letters and messages arrived from around the world, sent by military personnel who had served with me at various points throughout my career. Each message told a different story about the impact of my service on their own lives and careers. A former Iraqi officer who had worked with me during my deployment wrote about lessons learned in cross-cultural cooperation and mutual respect. A British colonel who had attended the staff college during my teaching tour described how my instruction had influenced his approach to intelligence analysis in subsequent assignments. The letters were compiled into a book that would be preserved for Sarah, providing her with insights into her mother's professional legacy and the lives she had touched through decades of military service. It was a collection of testimony to a life well lived in service to others. Marcus returned in his position at Georgetown, where his colleagues provided support and understanding as he adjusted to single parenthood while maintaining his own career obligations. Sarah began attending a local school known for its strong support of military families, where other children understood the unique circumstances of military life. The scholarship program I had established began accepting applications within months of my death, providing educational opportunities for children of military personnel who might otherwise lack resources for higher education. It was a way for my legacy to continue making a positive impact long after my own service had ended. Sarah grew up knowing the story of her mother's journey, from a young woman dismissed as too weak for the real world to a 3-star general whose funeral was attended by 500 soldiers in dress blues. It became part of her identity, a source of pride and inspiration that shaped her own understanding of what was possible through dedication and service to others. Years later, when Sarah was preparing for college, she would read through the letters that had been saved for her, learning about the mother she had lost too young, but whose influence continued to resonate through the lives of people she had served with. The stories painted a picture of leadership based on competence, integrity, and genuine care for others. Officers spoke of mentorship received, standards learned, and examples set that had influenced their own service for years afterward. Sarah listened to these conversations with the solemn attention of a child trying to understand adult concepts that were just beyond her comprehension. But she was beginning to grasp that her mother had been someone special, someone who had earned the respect and gratitude of many people. As the reception wound down, Patricia took Marcus aside for a private conversation about Sarah's future and the resources available to military families facing such circumstances. The Army takes care of its own, and arrangements had already been made to ensure Sarah would have educational opportunities and financial support throughout her childhood. Celeste was very thorough in her planning, Patricia explained. She established trust funds for Sarah's education and arranged for ongoing support through military family services. But beyond the financial aspects, there's a network of people who will be part of Sarah's life because they respected and admired her mother. She would appreciate knowing that Sarah will grow up understanding the values that shaped her career, Marcus replied. Military service was such a fundamental part of who Celeste was, and I want Sarah to know that legacy. She will. There are officers throughout the Army who will consider it an honor to serve as mentors and role models for Celeste's daughter. That's part of how military families take care of each other. In the days following the funeral, letters and messages arrived from around the world, sent by military personnel who had served with me at various points throughout my career. Each message told a different story about the impact of my service on their own lives and careers. A former Iraqi officer who had worked with me during my deployment wrote about lessons learned in cross-cultural cooperation and mutual respect. A British colonel who had attended the staff college during my teaching tour described how my instruction had influenced his approach to intelligence analysis in subsequent assignments. The letters were compiled into a book that would be preserved for Sarah, providing her with insights into her mother's professional legacy and the lives she had touched through decades of military service. It was a collection of testimony to a life well lived, in service to others. Marcus returned to his position at Georgetown, where his colleagues provided support and understanding as he adjusted to single parenthood while maintaining his own career obligations. Sarah began attending a local school known for its strong support of military families, where other children understood the unique circumstances of military life. The scholarship program I had established began accepting applications within months of my death, providing educational opportunities for children of military personnel who might otherwise lack resources for higher education. It was a way for my legacy to continue making a positive impact long after my own service had ended. Sarah grew up knowing the story of her mother's journey from a young woman dismissed as too weak for the real world to a 3-star general whose funeral was attended by 500 soldiers in dress blues. It became part of her identity, a source of pride and inspiration that shaped her own understanding of what was possible through dedication and service to others. Years later, when Sarah was preparing for college, she would read through the letters that had been saved for her, learning about the mother she had lost too young, but whose influence continued to resonate through the lives of people she had served with. The stories painted a picture of leadership based on competence, integrity, and genuine care for others. Officers spoke of mentorship received, standards learned, and examples set that had influenced their own service for years afterward. Sarah listened to these conversations with the solemn attention of a child trying to understand adult concepts that were just beyond her comprehension. But she was beginning to grasp that her mother had been someone special, someone who had earned the respect and gratitude of many people. As the reception wound down, Patricia took Marcus aside for a private conversation about Sarah's future and the resources available to military families facing such circumstances. The Army takes care of its own, and arrangements had already been made to ensure Sarah would have educational opportunities and financial support throughout her childhood. Celeste was very thorough in her planning, Patricia explained. She established trust funds for Sarah's education and